And hello, everyone. Welcome to McDuff Lives. I'm John O'Loughlin, and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. And special thanks to our guest tonight, Elana Freeland. Elana, thanks so much for making time for us. We are so grateful to have you once again back here at McDuff Lives. And besides saying it's been too long, I must say you're looking great, and you've been very, very busy with your writing and other engagements. It's delightful to have you back, and welcome.
Thank you so much, John. It's been a while. And I think now so much is going on for those of us who are terrifically engaged that it's hard to pull our head up in order to remember to do this or that. I mean, I'm just going like blazes right now in my own quiet way. I mean, it's not that I'm some big name or anything like that. It's just that there's so much to do, and the invitations keep coming. That's the thing I've noticed is when you get something going, then suddenly everybody's sort of awakening to your existence and what you have to contribute to the big picture. At least I think that's what it is.
And it's awesome too. I think that the word awesome is doubly applicable because it's not only is it big and huge and impressive, but it's also scary as hell.
You mean what I do?
Yeah, the biblical sense of awesome,
Yeah,
like this is like dies irae, the wrath of God or something in terms of scale, and
yeah,
so that makes it very difficult to confront your material. Like
that is
just
so true.
under an ionized sky. Who wants to live under an ionized sky? I mean that's like you're killing Mother Nature. We
Yeah.
we don't want to kill Mother Nature. I mean, come on, you couldn't really be doing that, could you? No, they couldn't be doing that. So, we won't read that book because that's a crazy idea under an ionized sky. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
I have that resistance, for goodness sakes. And if I have it, people that are completely clueless are going to have it even worse. But I bet you your books are doing pretty darn well in contrast to what I just said.
Well, the third book that just came out a year ago, the Geoengineered Transhumanism, how the environment has been weaponized by chemicals, electromagnetism, uh, nanotechnology for the for the sake of synthetic biology. That's a very big book. First of all, John, it's 650 pages, I believe. I mean, I took several big things that are all really separate disciplines in their own right, and I converged them to show how the geoengineering program is much more than the fluff you read about now and then in the newspapers. Oh, let me unplug my phone. And it's so big that I just had to write the whole book, and I've had great success with it. I mean, I'm not New York Times bestseller or anything, but I have had I've well, I've made thousands of dollars. I've sold thousands of copies, but mainly it's that people are beginning to wake up to a whole lot of things now, as you well know. And this just needs to be thrown in the pot. It's not like, I mean, this whole thing has been done, the geoengineering of the last 25 years, I might add, not just recently. That's all nonsense. Is just so it's so prevalent and so in our face that it's really hard to imagine that it hasn't always been this way. And of course, they count on that, they being the geoengineers and the various big deep pockets that really dominate running the geoengineering. They count on the fact that new generations are coming along all the time and have to catch up. And they're going to spend, I don't know, 10 or 15 years on, oh, it's just a conspiracy theory, and then they're going to spend another 10 years on, Oh, well, you know, it's all contrails that are up there. There's no such thing as chemtrails. I mean, that's kind of the part of the problem, is that it's such a big picture, and it's so there. It's like saying, "Oh, what's the chemical composition of the air I just breathed into my lungs at 5:05 in the morning?" You know, I mean, it's something that you don't think about because this is your environment, and that's kind of how I feel about it. Is that all I want? I don't have any illusions that I can stop this. There's no way. As Catherine Austin Fitts said years ago, this is the secret space program. And there is no way that they're going to change this geoengineering program other than possibly figure out another way to keep the air ionized than dropping a bunch of chaff, dropping aluminum, barium, strontium, chromium, all these things that we're breathing in on a nano scale. And it's affecting our health and our mental health, our physical health. You know, I don't think American health has ever been worse, at least in these generations. I can't speak for 150 years ago, but that's kind of why I want it front and center for the people willing to look at it, is not to scare the pants off them that, you know, there's this huge weapon system that is the military has that it hasn't told us about. I mean, you know, we went through the Manhattan Project before, and in many ways, it's true. This is like a second Manhattan Project. But I want people to at least know where they are and what is going on around them, rather than look for a way to go into denial and some sort of false security, while the medical industry and big pharma make a fortune off of their depleted health and the immune, you know, the autoimmune conditions that are just rife now. All of this is connected to what we're breathing from these programs that are going on in our atmosphere. And you know, how many years ago, back in the late 90s, Clifford Carnicom, the independent scientist that's still my friend, and I've worked with him for years, he saw it back then. He understood in the late 90s that not only was there all this debris coming down in the wake of these jets, that, I mean, he being a chemist, he knew that the trails he was seeing coming out of the jets were not condensation trails. Those are chemical trails. They had chemical signatures. I mean, you can tell that from the ground. You don't need to go up there and take a specimen of it. But he had to collect the data from all the condensation and the dust that his HEPA filter was picking up, and really dig in, because whenever he would write the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, or the CDC, or somebody else, he would get no response, zero. And so he was completely on his own. And that's when I met him and realized that the atmosphere we are breathing now is utterly different than it was 50, 60, 70 years ago. It's just not the same at all. So it's been transformed. But then the question comes, why? Is this just kind of what you get when you have military operations going on in the atmosphere that are secret? Or is something being intentionally done? And that's the question that's been burning in me through 3 books. Exactly.
Let me just pose one little question as to what you just recited, of course, about the contrails, chemtrails, and of course, every word gets its controversy nowadays, and some people will object to that word chemtrails, but still believe that there's something going on. I've tried to understand it from different points of view, but I certainly haven't made a major study of it. The pilots that I've talked to, just a few, do not believe it. That, they will tell you that it depends on, you know, the atmosphere, the humidity, the temperature, and but it's just hydrocarbons. It's just what's left over after combustion of the fuel, and they're quite convinced of it. And so I also am aware that there's been lots of I haven't studied Clifford Carnicom's work in particular, but I have read a lot of people's accounts of rain samples and rainwater samples, and I do believe that there's barium and the strontium and the the nanoparticles of different dangerous things, and particularly the one that concerns me the most, because I think it's the most prevalent, would be aluminum.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I want somebody to go up there in a balloon and catch some of this stuff and bring it to a lab and say, look, this came out of that plane on this day on this flight, and here's this is the chemicals that are in there that came right out of the engine of this particular plane. And until somebody actually does that extent of proof, not only not only your average person, but me, is going to be hard to convince, because we've been talking about this for many years, and the lack of a scientific consensus that it really is going on, um, and the airline pilots are not, they're not worried about it. They're the ones that are breathing it. They're following the next plane. It's got to be in the air that the passengers and the pilot are breathing.
Mm-hmm.
I know sometimes you hear about pilots concerned about it, but I just want to point that out, that is one of the speed bumps that I have when I try to confront this issue. If you have any comment on that.
Sure, sure. I mean, I could counter just about everything you just said with hearsay from other people who who are also pilots and doctors and scientists who have a very different opinion. I mean, I think that's one of the things you run across, John, when you're dealing with a classified operation. And this is highly classified. This is not open. In order to find out what it is, you have to be some sort of obsessive like me in order to go through masses and masses of materials, including papers, patents, various conferences, military and otherwise, and slowly put the picture together as if it's scattered all over the place. And a lot. Who's going to do that? I mean, very few people are going to spend the time to do that, or even have the time to do that. So, I mean, I think the first thing we need to do is admit that this is a classified project, and it is not about solar radiation management. It is about all sorts of. I mean, Clifford Carnicom named 7 major operations going on. And when Catherine Austin Fitts went through with a lawyer friend of hers and came up with the fact that $21 trillion was missing from the American budget, and where could it have gone when no one was admitting to it, and realized that, yes, there is also another classified project going on called the Secret Space Program, for want of a better term. And it's been going on, gosh, well, I always think it's been going on since we brought Wernher von Braun over.
Yeah.
But not at the end of the war. We brought him over in 1937. And he was already working on our space program, on the so-called rockets, and the fuel, what kind of fuel are we going to have going up in the rockets? And from there, it then went to Kennedy. When Kennedy had that great idea, at least he thought it was great, that we were going to work with Russia. We were going to work with the Soviet Union on the space, on the space age. And that was certainly not going to be allowed to happen by the very defense contractors that outgoing President Eisenhower warned us of, the military-industrial complex. So we've had this secret space program that is just completely buried in all sorts of intelligence double talk in order to keep us from actually knowing what's going on. I mean, how many years did it take for us to learn that in the 50s, the military was taking nuclear bombs up into space and trying to blow away the Van Allen belts? We didn't hear about it for 30 years. So that's what I have to say to what you're saying is, yeah, you're not going to hear about it now. And a lot of assumptions are going to be made because people don't really know from the ground the difference between a contrail and how it's very short, starts coming out of the engine chamber at about 1 or 2 meters. And then it lasts for, at the very most, 30 seconds and it dissipates. Whereas what we have now are these long trails. And they are, when I was just looking at one tonight, right over my apartment complex. And I was gauging chemically what it is because I've sort of memorized a few patterns or signatures, as they're called, chemical signatures of different chemical compositions. And so that in itself it's needing study. It's not needing, oh, there is nothing there. I mean, obviously, like you said, there's barium, strontium, and things that we're breathing. We know something's going on.
Entertain this theory real quick.
Okay.
I suspect, it's just me, but that they've engineered the contrails to linger and spread without the contrails themselves being the metallic material, but that it's kind of a camouflage layer so that we'll think, oh, well, that's what those people call chemtrails, but it's really just contrails and it's just, spreading out, and that's what it always does. So you see this stuff all the time, but what's really going on is 10,000 feet higher planes that we can't see, with the marked white, that are dropping the real nanoparticles that are coming down. And so that might explain why the pilots are saying, no, that's just hydrocarbons coming out of our planes, don't worry about it. But what it does is that because they've engineered it somehow to linger and fall, but on the other hand, when you see those like almost identical feather-like patterns coming out on both sides of these things as they fall, and you say that's got to be engineered somehow.
Yeah.
That's got to be engineered. And does it look like water, or does it look like a particulate matter? And I have to come down and say it looks like particulate matter, but once again, they are, like with everything that they do, they are layers and layers and layers of deception.
That's
and
right.
so that's my latest theory that I throw out there first.
Well, it brings in a really important point that you're absolutely right. I think once I was going to give a talk somewhere and I was going up in a jet and I counted the layers that we went through as we rose in altitude up to 35,000 or whatever. And I counted 11. I counted 11 layers. So yeah, there's layer upon layer all the way up into the stratosphere. But here's a point that that this is where it gets complex, is this layer of cirrus cloud cover. It's not really cirrus clouds. Its chemical composition is such that it's really plasma. Now, how do I know that? Well, because I read papers and patents and realize that plasma physics is the name of the game now, and that ionizing the atmosphere, since they had established through HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project up in Gakona, Alaska, HAARP more than any other ionospheric heater, because the power they were able to get out of HAARP was basically because of the phased array antennas that they put up there. And these phased arrays are the kind of antenna that is not a radial. It's not just broadcasting radially. No, you can take these particular types of antennas and create a beam and create a very powerful beam, as a matter of fact. If you have, as they do up there, acres of these phased array antennas. So what they did up to 2013 was when it seemed that the DARPA phase, you know, the people that do the big research for the real secret stuff for the military, the DARPA phase of the research, quote unquote, going on with HAARP was completed when they realized that they had absolute control over the ionosphere. Now, you know, a pilot that you're talking to, he knows trails, he knows the jets, but does he know how it's connected to things like HAARP, these huge science projects of the secret space program, wherein what they want is they want control, full spectrum dominant control over planet Earth. And to do that, you've got to have control over the ionosphere, the stratosphere, and way above all of it, the magnetosphere. You've got to have full control over all that. So imagine that they've been pursuing that, and that the reason they're keeping the atmosphere ionized and the reason that they're letting out all this particulate matter from the jets to create this plasma cloud cover constantly is not to protect us from solar radiation or anything like that. No, it's called doping. They have to dope the atmosphere super heavily if they're going to have this constant ability to draw from the ionosphere. In a weapon sense, yes, and in a heat sense, yes, for various reasons, various military reasons. And meanwhile, we're going to need a good story, because people are going to notice that the planet's heating up, that, you know, there's the clouds, the sun is hardly visible now in various places that where the sun used to dominate. And you're going to have something like, gee, yeah, let's have climate change. Let's have global warming. Let's blame carbons for this. And we'll get money from nations in order to pay for the secret space program that we're pursuing. So, you know, all of that is a lot of, you know, how the devil is in the details, John. You have to go into deep, deep details in order to see how big this picture is. It's not just a matter of what's coming out of the combustion chamber. These are supplementary chemical systems on these jets, and that's commercial and military. It's not just from the, I mean, you look at some of these trails, and I'm sure you've seen them on the internet. Somebody will catch a shot, and you'll see 2 trails coming out of one wing, 2 trails coming out of another wing, and 4 trails coming out of the back. 8 trails? That's not from the engine compartment. That's something else. That's the distribution of chemicals to keep the atmosphere doped in a certain way, at the very least. It's about keeping the atmosphere wireless friendly, I like to say, for all the operations that are going on. And I don't mean just cell phones, people's communications, fast movie downloads, etc. No, I mean military operations that are going on constantly. And yet, you know, to make sure that the people who are the taxpayers paying at least some of this bill, not all of it. There's no way. This is hugely expensive. But they are, you know, as long as you have a regime that can print money, what do you care? You can just print some more money. So anyway, that's how big the picture gets when you start realizing it's not just about the chemtrails, or, you know, and that term, I'm reminding you, comes from the U.S. Air Force Academy. That is not a conspiracy term. That's straight from the Air Force. That's what they call their chemistry manuals, chemtrails. So, you know, they've very much been planning out this for decades to not just control the weather, but there are 7 basic operations that are being pursued right now. But it can't be done without the control over the ionosphere and with the doping of all these nanoparticles, these chemical nanoparticles. Can't be done.
So much to talk about. I want to move on towards the transhumanism aspect of your work and get back to where you started, which is that they are working on a synthetic biology, and by to tie that into the work that we've been doing here at McDuff Lives, and a lot of our colleagues just digging as hard as we can into the source of the recent pandemic and the recent uh, you know, big pharma efforts to inoculate everybody, and trying to figure out what's really behind that. But one of the one of the ways to look at it is that it is possibly just a great big data gathering procedure, where they just want to study every one of us and study all of the data that they can from us, and they need to see how we react to some of these quote unquote medications that they give us, and that may be uh, one of their goals is to study, us, so that they can move on to their transhumanist improvements of us. But still, within a carbon-based biology, as far as I can tell, because that seems to be the way that these viruses and things are working so far. However, the suggestion is now made that some of these inoculations, or maybe the thing itself, and I'm using cryptic language, are actually synthetic themselves, that they might not even be based around a carbon, but maybe around silicon. And then there's the issue of what is the function of graphene, uh, and is it, that is these blood-brain barrier things, is that connected with the transhumanism project? They need to get something into your brain, so they're figuring that out. um, uh, so in other words, what I'd like to do is to try to bring your perspective into what we've been working on here at McDuff Lives, in terms of the actual, uh, what's really going on with this 3 years of pandemic.
So, John, how cryptic do I need to speak? Because I have a lot I could say about this.
Well, we say jabs, and we say therapies, and we say meditation.
Inoculations and
Yeah,
mhm.
that's cool.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So we started out with questions about the chemical trails,
Yeah.
and then I brought in the big elephant in the living room for that whole program being HAARP, and so now let's talk again about the chemicals and a sort of growth curve that I went through and Clifford Carnicom went through as well. So he realized early on that these chemicals coming down, there were certain chemicals, and he measured the harmonics of these chemicals as they were coming down, and realized that it seemed to him there was a pattern whereby certain primary ions in our bodies. I mean, I think right away of the potassium ion, uh, were being targeted. It just seemed, too. It wasn't random. The harmonic readings were the same over and over and over. The pulsing that he was measuring of the electromagnetics that were being used to deliver these chemicals in the atmosphere. I mean, we're being pulsed all the time, right? We know that from the Schumann resonance, 7.83 hertz. That's the natural resonance of the planet, and that ironically or divinely happens to be the same resonance of the human brain. So we know that pulsing is used to deliver these things from the jets, the drones, and also the sounding rockets, their launches. There's each one of these things has been studied in depth by many people. It's just that you don't hear about them because the entire internet is controlled. the entire television world is controlled. The entire newspaper realm is controlled. You just don't hear about this because it's classified. So I just want to make that clear that once we began to see these patterns that were affecting certain primary ions of healthy body, it seemed that it was much more than just sort of flotsam and jetsam that happens because of military programs. It was not just, oh well, we have to do this, all this doping has to happen, and you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet, blah blah blah. No, that there was an intention going on to affect humanity. And so at that point, things really began to change for me. And I began to look at the data very differently than I had before, where I was just sort of categorizing things and proving those things we started this talk out with. So now let me jump ahead because we don't have a lot of time. So what I discovered through studying Clifford's work, I've studied the work of Tony Pantalaresco, a Canadian herbalist in Ottawa. And Tony is very involved in nanotechnology. He had Morgellons. Remember that, John? Morgellons?
Sure.
Yeah. So the Morgellons, now people may not know this, the CDC has admitted that Morgellons works after years of supporting the idea that it was, what did they call it? They called it a dementia, that you're feeling things itching and moving around under your skin. Well, send him to the psych ward. They finally admitted that there was something going on, but they call it a skin ailment. Well, it's much more than a skin ailment. It's actually a genetically modified bioengineering. And the Morgellons entity is part of what is now being found in the serums and in the post-inoculation blood. It's all connected. It's all connected. And you just have to take your time and go from one phase to the next, where the Morgellons, Clifford is the only one I know of who is an actual bona fide scientist who used to work for the Department of Defense and left it and has worked on his own and pretty much solo for years, has produced over 100 papers that you can read at carnicominstitute.org, along with photographs of looking deeply at this bioengineered creature that people wrongly call Morgellons, which is a term from the 18th century and doesn't describe at all what this is. And Clifford has renamed it the cross-domain bacteria because it was bioengineered to have bits of all three domains of life in it, including inorganic. So if you can look at the chemistry of what was in the Morgellons and the parts of the Morgellons, and then you listen to the doctors and the researchers who are now analyzing what they're finding under their electron microscopes, you see a tremendous correlation here. So it appears that the synthetic biology move was, first of all, delivering Morgellons through the trails, because, we all did the tests when Clifford started up. I did the red wine test, spitting into a clean jar after cleaning my mouth and then sloshing around grape juice or red wine for the dye factor, and spit it into the jar. And then you see, as it settles, you see this creature with a very tiny sort of creature with some sort of long cylindrical body, scooching its way along the bottom of the glass. And it's that he analyzed and opened up, had to do it chemically through many experiments with Petri dishes, because there's no way to kill it because it's not fully organic. It's a creature, it's a inorganic life form is what they're calling these things, inorganic life form. So, that that beginning and then seeing it in my blood under the microscope, and seeing how it was sucking out the iron from my erythrocytes, it gets your attention. And now what we're hearing is the problems with the blood, and it really correlates with the research that went on regarding Morgellons, because unlike the chemicals up in the sky, we had lots of opportunities to have actual critters that you could actually look at, because they're coming from people's bodies, and they're coming down in the rain, and they're coming in the snow. So anyway, that's sort of the genesis of how this realization that something intentional has been done, leading to transhumanism, i.e., a human who is transformed in some way through the induction of bioengineered critters, and has been chemically prepared, it seems, with nanotechnology. I mean, we have trillions and trillions of nanosensors and nanobots in our bodies that we have breathed from the air that have been dumped, and the military's been very forthcoming about how they're dumping things up there, because to them, they believe that we're going to believe that it's only that we're checking the air pressure up there, we're checking the chemical composition, we're checking this and that. So we need all these nanosensors up there, but these nanosensors fall earthward, and they end up being so tiny that we breathe them in, and they go very easily beyond the blood-brain barrier, because they're a billionth of a meter is not very much. So anyway, that's a very generalized, sort of broad sketch of the journey I've taken in the last 13 years.
Transhumanism is really in a lot of people's minds now. It hasn't been, but now it is. And, your work has led to a realization that there's, but I think the most famous um, uh, marketing of transhumanism is coming from the World Economic Forum, and the man named Klaus Schwab, and Klaus Schwab is very, very insistent that transhumanism is coming, and it's going to be. We're all going to be happy. We're all going to own nothing, and everything's it's going to be done for us. Sounds great, except for you never know when you're going to die, or what they're going to do next, because you have no control whatsoever over the big picture of life.
Right.
Yeah.
And if I could interrupt to say, I think the person telling the details of what Klaus Schwab is announcing is his right-hand man, Yuval Harari. And if you listen closely to Mr. Harari, he pretty much tells you how you're going to be run from under the skin. He pretty much says it, right? And
he also says that most of us are not going to be here. I mean, we're going to be, we're not going to be necessary.
Right. A lot of people are going to die.
They don't need us, so why would they let us live?
Right. But mostly I'm going to stick with what I'm most interested in what Harari says about this under the skin thing is, yes, this gets to the nanotechnology I'm talking about. And it's difficult to talk about nanotechnology because it's been a huge revolution. It happened between the 70s and the 90s, and not a word, not a peep was said about it. But by the 90s, it pretty much was a done deal, and it was a revolution. In fact, talk to a scientist in what is now called, what is the name? The nanomaterials. They can get a PhD in nanomaterials. Talk to one of them, and I have had a long conversation with one who has retired, and you hear how it's the holy grail of physics. Now, why is it the holy grail? Why is the nanoparticle the holy grail of physics? Because of the tininess of its size and all the things you can get it to do, similar to the graphene oxide that we hear about being in the inoculations. Now, the graphene oxide is really the holy grail because it's a nanoparticle. It's very tiny, and it consolidates together. It's what they call a swarm, and it works together, and you can program it to do certain things. You can have absolute control over it, and that's it, as far as I understand, John, from my reading and thinking, is that that's going to be our nervous system for this transhuman. Because once the graphene oxide gets into you, whether it's inoculated into you or you're breathing it from what's falling from the sky, and they're using lots and lots of graphene oxide for various operations in the atmosphere for this weather engineering that's going on. So either way, you get a lot of graphene in you. Immediately upon getting into your warm body, it begins to self-replicate. And it eventually, according to its programming, which is being run remotely from some laptop central of with an algorithm, it will create whatever it's told, it's programmed to create, and it can make nerves. So when we saw that those videos of undertakers in particular, embalmers, finding these long, thin, thready things inside the cadavers' arteries and veins,
Yeah.
I immediately thought of that it's the hydrogel that the graphene oxide is in when it's in the serum and going into the body. And when you die, perhaps that hydrogel then hardens. But what I want to stick with is that when I look at the chemical composition of the hydrogel, is an excellent example. Some of the chemicals in it are exactly the chemicals that were in the early Morgellons that Clifford Carnicom was analyzing. So that connection cannot be ignored. Now, it needs a lot of scientific discovery, right? But what has happened regarding the classification of this project is that Clifford Carnicom, for one, has been completely put in the cold darkness of not being able to publish papers, not being recognized, not being responded to by the CDC and the EPA, et cetera. So, this is the problem with that Secrets Act, that National Security Act, that classifies things. And then, it's basically noli me tangere. You can't touch it. You can't touch it. So that's kind of where I believe I can say Clifford is at, and I am at, and yet for me, I'm just in the business of letting the public know about this to the best of my ability, and I'm not attempting to be recognized by the scientific community. I think I have a dozen scientists who follow what I do. It may be more, but I hear from a dozen or so. So I'm satisfied with that because I too am learning as I go.
Let's talk for a minute, if you don't mind, about Elon Musk. Elon Musk has been in the news a lot now. He's catching a lot of print and time on people's social media. Very controversial. Seems to be uh, uh, being portrayed as a hero of the right now and vilified by the left. and it's all about Twitter and what's he going to do with Twitter. But that, of course, is a bunch of nonsense. And the real story of Elon Musk is a deep connection with this with the space program. And so here you have been speaking this evening about getting things into the human body. He has a program called Neuralink, and he also has satellites called Starlink. And you mentioned the idea of a laptop running what's going on in your body, but also, that laptop may be beaming up to a satellite that's following you and beaming your instructions down to you. Uh, if not Elon Musk, somebody else may be doing this type of thing. And I want you to tie in the idea of planetary lockdown and how the ionization of the sky ties in with your first book, or the first of this trilogy about the planet lockdown, and the idea that they can, through these electronic means and the nanoparticles, uh, turn the planet into a prison planet.
and run our bodies and brains from space. Absolutely. I mean, in a way, HAARP is used to the HAARP system. Now, there's HAARP that's up in Gakona, Alaska, and that's one ionospheric heater, and it is connected to 3 or 4 other bases that are in Alaska that have to do with other aspects of this control over the ionosphere. Okay, so, but I'm going to talk about it as if it's an entire system. I'll call it the HAARP system. The HAARP system, primarily, the lockdown happens because the HAARP system maintains a certain calibration of pulses that all the machinery that I name in Under an Ionized Sky, the second book, all the machinery that we think of as convenience items, energy items, from radar installations to NexRad, those big golf ball looking things, to cell towers, GWEN towers, ground wave emergency management or network towers, the Internet of Things, the magnetite in our brains that we've breathed in from the trails, now the graphene oxide that we're breathing in. All of this machinery can be forced into a calibration to operate together. And that would include, I forgot 2 very important ones that were 3 that people think are, well, okay, they're green. Yeah, right, they're green. Not really. That would be the wind farms, the wind towers. That would be the fracking wells of the oil fracking going on. That would be the fiber optic cables that are running under our streets now. And then I haven't even gotten to the other part of the Internet of Things, which is the nano sensors that are now a lot. We've breathed them in. They're in our body and brain, but they're also in our streets, in the walls. They're everywhere. They're the dust as you dust your house. In the dust, you're going to see what is smart dust, and it too is communicating. It too is reporting data. To go back to your original point of the collection of data, the reporting of data. Yes, it's all around us now. It's in us, and we're all in this calibration that has changed our atmosphere. It's changed the Schumann resonance. The Schumann resonance is not 7.83 anymore. It vacillates all over the place. It gets very high. I remember weeks ago I checked it, because you can go to a site and check it if we can still believe that site. I mean, you're always faced with that, and it was at 13 hertz. So this way of turning the planet into a machine would be the easiest way I can say this is, imagine that. Let me just get really far out for a minute, John. And so far, I haven't been that far out. But imagine that this brotherhood that I talk about in the second book, in the chapter that I call the Temple of CERN. And, you know, the particle accelerator is definitely part of this. Imagine that there's a brotherhood at NASA, which there is, by the way, called the Saturnalian Brotherhood. And one of their great dreams is to reactivate Saturn, which is basically a dead planet. And it has those wonderful rings around it. Back in the 50s and 60s, there was a gentleman whose name I've got to memorize his name, but he wrote a book about the Cassini that went by the Saturn and studied the moons, took a look at the rings, and they did some filming of it as well. And he shows a film in which, at least it looked like it to me. I mean, it was not a great film, but it was something taken in space, of a vast, huge machine, it seemed, fixing and repairing the rings around Saturn. And I don't know if it was his idea or my idea. So it's a long time ago that I looked at it. But it seemed to me that an AI system was still operant on Saturn after what, millions of years? I mean, this was a long time ago if Saturn was indeed in a different part of the solar system and indeed was a living planet of some sort. So imagine that they want to turn the Earth into a machine and have it run like a machine in order to control all the systems. This is what full spectrum dominance means. It's a military doctrine. It means that you control the entire electromagnetic spectrum. So imagine that the megalomaniacs that are running the secret space program want to have control over every single aspect of planet Earth. They are not interested in in nature. They are not interested in the so-called natural laws of Newton anymore. That's over. Now it's going to be like Mr. Harari seems to indicate, that the entire objective is to make it so that it's all controllable by man as God on planet Earth. And, you know, I don't know if when you were younger, you read The Secret. Remember The Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis? He did a trilogy, a science fiction trilogy. And that's how I think of planet Earth, that we are to be the silent planet. Yeah, I mean, I can see how a lot of this has to do with full spectrum dominance from space, bouncing signals off from HAARP installations, bouncing signals off of the ionosphere and bringing them down into different areas in order to do different political things, in order to have different moods, maybe, I don't know the right word, behaviors of the population.
Isn't it just as simple as weather control, though? I mean, when I think of the HAARP, you know, the phased array focusing up onto the ionosphere, and then it's focused down into a part of back into the biosphere where it heats up a part of the sky, which would then cause a storm to either zig or zag because of the difference in air pressure created by the heat.
Well, yeah,
I think the actual utility of these things is in sending our water to wherever they want to send it, and you know, the control over where the rain falls can be affected by ionizing the sky and
right.
using that concentrated electromagnetic force to create heat or the lack of heat to steer storms where you want them. I think that's
Right.
part of it.
Well, that is part of it, and that's a done deal. All the weather, there is no natural weather now, to my knowledge. None. Zero. It's all engineered. But along with that, let me just name them really quickly. There's another operation that's chemical and electromagnetic. And that is a lot of things, all the way from dominating the Birkeland currents that connect us to the sun, to the Alvin waves, the same thing. Then the third operation, planetary geophysical, changing the context of the continents, using hurricanes and tornadoes to do it, and fires, geo-engineered fires that are going on, which use nanotechnology to do that. Directed energy weapons, using everything now that I've just named as directed energy weapons in order for control. Surveillance and neural manipulation, that's mind control from space. Yes, that's a done deal. Nanotechnology and synthetic biology and transhumanism. That's the one that I'm concentrating on now, which has many, many aspects to it. And then finally, the seventh operation, which is kind of interesting, and I never have time to really do justice to it, is the cloaking and obscuration and detection of exotic propulsion craft in our atmosphere, along with plasma life forms. And they're doing all seven of these operations. The weather is just the beginning. And yet the weather is very important, John, you're right, because that helps to increase the electrical nature of the ionized atmosphere. And they definitely need it electrical all the time. That's why people always say in the summer now, no matter where you are, here in the Pacific Northwest even, I hear people saying, golly, it's so hot today. It's like being in a microwave oven. Yeah, yes.
Our summers have really been dreadfully humid as well, and people do notice it, but they haven't gone far enough to associate it with the chemtrails and what we talked about
Yeah,
tonight. Okay, your book, Geoengineered Transhumanism, and available on Amazon. Is that where people should go, or where?
No, I wouldn't go there. I don't like to support Amazon if I can help it. But I have a color edition that I'm publishing alone. See, I was, for the first two books, I was with Feral House, and I have left them in order to make a little more money per book. I was very satisfied with their product. They did a great job. But now I'm on my own, and I'm about to rewrite this book into two books for the Inner Traditions Publishing. They have approached me, and they want to do a second edition of what I've done, but they want it in two books. One on geoengineering with a bit of a reference to synthetic biology, and then the other one on synthetic biology with a reference to geoengineering. So that's what I'm doing this winter, John. I would go to the Rudolf Steiner bookstore in Seattle, Washington, to get the color edition. It's well worth it. There are 60 illustrations, some of which really need color in order for you to see what they are. And then otherwise, then when the Inner Traditions books come out, they will be entirely separate from this book.
Well, there's so much more we haven't got to, Elana. I hope you'll come back and we can have another talk.
Well, there's so much to it, John. I mean, what can I say? I hope you'll do some reading sometime, because I think that's why I wrote the books. Is I think I can do better justice there than in an hour show.
All right. Well, that's a good idea, and I do love to read books. I have. Right now, I'm in the middle of one book, The History of Sullivan and Cromwell, the law firm that put together
Yes.
all of our real problem financial and corporate systems, and that's a very interesting thing. I love to read books on the show, but I've been on such a a wonderful tour of talking to people in Russia and around the world, and really enjoying doing the interviews. So, but thanks for the idea, and I'll certainly keep it in mind. Reading your 3 books would be very, very educational for me and everyone else. All right, Elana, thank you again. Thanks everyone in the chat and everyone on Facebook, and thanks again to Jumping Mouse, our dear Catherine, for setting up this interview tonight. It's been a pleasure. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, John.